Now, if you've ever wondered what happens when an entire galactic civilization builds its military doctrine around the belief that emotions are a design flaw, let me introduce you to the Hegemony of Rational Species. Picture, if you will, a collection of highly evolved alien races who've spent the last 3 millennia perfecting the art of warfare through pure mathematics. They've reduced conquest to elegant equations, turned battle strategies into probability matrices, and generally convinced themselves that feeling anything during combat is about as useful as bringing a calculator to a poetry reading. The hegemony's crown jewel was something they called the Mathematical Warfare Doctrine, a system so sophisticated it could predict the outcome of any conflict before the first shot was fired. Casualties were calculated to the decimal point, surrender conditions were algorithmically optimized, and victory was essentially a foregone conclusion once you plugged in the variables. It was warfare as sterile and efficient as a surgical procedure, which, coincidentally, was exactly how they preferred it. Commander Vex'thara of the Zilithian Fourth Fleet exemplified this philosophy perfectly. Standing 7 feet tall with crystalline skin that refracted light in geometric patterns when she was particularly pleased with herself, which was often, she had never encountered a military problem that couldn't be solved with sufficient computational power. Her species had evolved past the inconvenience of emotions roughly 50,000 years ago, replacing them with what they generously called optimized decision-making protocols. Beside her in the command center of the dreadnought Logical Conclusion, General Korthmel represented the Draknari contribution to hegemony smugness. His people had taken a different evolutionary path, developing brains so large they'd had to engineer additional skull capacity just to house their oversized egos. The Draknari were particularly proud of their ability to process 17 different tactical scenarios simultaneously while composing what they considered poetry, though their verse typically read like technical manuals written by particularly pretentious computers. The probability matrices are quite beautiful, Korthmel was saying, his forearms dancing across holographic displays that showed Earth suspended in a web of tactical projections. The humans possess approximately 2.3 billion military-age individuals, but their technology registers at only 0.7 on the hegemony advancement scale. Fleet composition analysis indicates a 97.3% probability of total capitulation within 4.7 standard rotations. Vex'thara's crystalline features shifted into what passed for a smile among her people, a subtle rearrangement of light patterns that somehow managed to convey condescension across species barriers. The preliminary behavioral analysis is even more encouraging. These humans appear to make military decisions based on something they call feelings. Their historical records show countless examples of tactically unsound choices made for purely emotional reasons. The irony, of course, was that both commanders were experiencing what could only be described as excitement about their upcoming victory, though they'd have been mortally offended if anyone had pointed this out. The hegemony had spent so long congratulating itself on transcending emotion that they'd forgotten the difference between not having feelings and simply refusing to acknowledge them. Their concept of honor is particularly amusing, Korthmel continued, pulling up holographic records of human military history. They have documented cases of soldiers sacrificing tactical advantages to, and I quote, do the right thing. The mathematical inefficiency is staggering. What neither commander realized, and what their perfectly calibrated sensors and probability engines couldn't detect, was that they were about to encounter something their doctrine had never accounted for. The hegemony's Mathematical Warfare Doctrine was indeed a masterpiece of logical thinking, capable of predicting and countering every rational response to invasion. The problem, as they were about to discover, was that humans had never particularly cared about being rational. The Hegemony fleet dropped out of hyperspace with the kind of precision that would have made a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. 347 vessels arranged themselves in a perfect geometric formation above Earth's moon, their hulls gleaming with the sort of technological superiority that typically made primitive civilizations soil themselves and start drafting surrender documents. Admiral Reese Nakamura, watching the display from the bridge of the Earth Defense Force flagship Defiant Purpose, did neither of these things. Instead, she took a sip of coffee that had gone cold sometime during the previous hour's emergency briefings and muttered, "Well, that's inconvenient." The Hegemony's opening gambit followed their playbook with religious devotion. A transmission arrived precisely 17 minutes after fleet deployment, long enough to let the humans contemplate their hopeless situation, short enough to prevent any desperate military preparations. Commander Vex'thara's image materialized on screens across Earth's command networks, her crystalline features refracting the bridge lighting into prismatic patterns that probably tested very well with focus groups back on Zilithia. "Inhabitants of the third planet," she began, consulting what appeared to be a script. "Your military capabilities have been analyzed and found insufficient. Surrender immediately, and your species will be incorporated into the Hegemony as a client civilization. Continued resistance will result in calculated escalation until compliance is achieved. You have 6 of your rotational periods to respond." The translation software had clearly struggled with certain concepts. What Vex'thara had actually said was closer to "submit now, or we'll hurt you in mathematically optimal increments." But diplomacy had never been the Hegemony's strong suit. Admiral Nakamura's response came back within the hour, which impressed the alien commanders with its promptness, if not its content. "Commander Vex'thara, thank you for the generous offer. After careful consideration, we've decided we're quite fond of our independence. If you'd like to discuss alternative arrangements, we're happy to negotiate. Otherwise, we'll see you out there." General Korthmel's 4 arms performed what could only be described as a shrug. Predictable. Stage 2 protocols indicate a demonstration of superior firepower should adjust their risk assessment. The demonstration came in the form of a precisely targeted strike on an abandoned asteroid mining station in the outer system. The Hegemony's weapons turned several million tons of rock and metal into an expanding cloud of superheated particles with the kind of efficiency that made their engineers proud and their accountants happy. Earth's response was to launch every available ship toward the alien fleet. "Fascinating," Vex'thara observed as her tactical displays lit up with incoming vessel signatures. "They're actually attacking." The probability matrices suggested a 12.7% chance of immediate retaliation, but I calculated that as within acceptable parameters for irrational behavior. The first engagement unfolded exactly as the Hegemony's computers had predicted. Human ships, while admirably constructed for their technological level, were simply outclassed. Earth's finest pilots threw themselves against alien shields that absorbed their weapons fire like raindrops hitting a battleship. The EDF Yorktown lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds before its hull breached. The Mumbai's Pride managed nearly 6 minutes through what the aliens grudgingly admitted was creative tactical maneuvering. But something strange kept appearing in the human communications chatter that the Hegemony's linguists were intercepting. Pilots who'd lost weapons systems were pulling back to escort damaged friendly vessels to safety. Captains with tactical advantages were breaking off attacks to rescue survivors from disabled ships. And through it all, one word kept appearing in their transmissions, a word that made the alien translators pause and double-check their databases. Mercy. Commander Vex'thara filed it under cultural curiosities and prepared for the inevitable human surrender. After all, the mathematics were quite clear about what happened next. The mathematics, as it turned out, had never met humans before. The first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong with the hegemony's calculations came during the battle for Europa Station. According to their projections, the human orbital facility should have surrendered after losing 60% of its defensive capability. Instead, the station commander, a woman named Captain Torres, who apparently hadn't read the same tactical manuals as the aliens, did something that broke several fundamental assumptions of the Mathematical Warfare Doctrine. She opened her airlocks to rescue hegemony survivors. "Explain this to me again," General Korthmel demanded, his forearms gesturing at the tactical display with the kind of frustrated energy usually reserved for malfunctioning equipment. The humans disabled the rational discourse, then immediately dispatched rescue shuttles to evacuate our crew? Commander Vex'thara's crystalline skin had shifted to a muddy brown color that indicated deep confusion among her species. The behavior appears to be genuine. Our survivors report receiving medical treatment that exceeds the standards of the hegemony prisoner protocols. Several crew members have expressed discomfort with resuming hostilities. This was putting it mildly. What the survivors had actually experienced was something that didn't exist in hegemony databases. Enemy combatants who treated wounded opponents with the same care they gave their own people. Zilithian engineer Vex'thara had been pulled from her shattered fighter by human medic Elena Vasquez, who'd spent 3 hours performing surgery to save her life, then handed her a cup of something called hot chocolate, and asked if she needed to call anyone to let them know she was safe. The psychological impact on beings raised to view warfare as a mathematical exercise was roughly equivalent to discovering that gravity worked backwards on Tuesdays. Perhaps it's a form of psychological warfare, Korthmel suggested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. Attempting to induce guilt responses in our personnel to reduce combat effectiveness. Vex'thara would have loved to agree, but the evidence kept pointing in increasingly uncomfortable directions. Human tactical decisions consistently prioritized minimizing casualties over achieving military objectives. They'd actually abandoned a successful flanking maneuver on the logical premise when they detected Draknari civilians aboard. Civilians who weren't supposed to be there according to hegemony regulations, but whom the humans somehow identified and protected anyway. The breaking point came during the assault on Luna City. Vex'thara had personally led a boarding party onto the human command station, expecting the kind of brutal close-quarters fighting that made accountants nervous and generals famous. Instead, she'd found herself trapped in a collapsed corridor section with a human soldier named Private Chen, both of them pinned under debris while atmosphere leaked out through hull breaches. Private Chen had looked at her, really looked, not the calculating assessment of a tactical threat, but the concerned evaluation of one person checking if another person was hurt, and then proceeded to use his emergency oxygen supply to keep them both alive until rescue arrived. He'd done this while maintaining a running commentary about his sister's upcoming wedding, the terrible food and military rations, and his opinion that the whole war was a damn shame, because you folks seem pretty decent once you get past all the shooting. When Elena Vasquez had arrived with the rescue team, she'd treated Vex'thara's injuries with the same methodical care she'd shown every other casualty, human or alien. Then she'd done something that would haunt the Zilithian commander for cycles to come. She'd smiled, patted Vex'thara's shoulder gently, and said, "Try not to get yourself killed out there, okay? This war's stupid enough without losing good people to it." 30 minutes later, Vex'thara had been back in her command ship, planning the next phase of the assault against the same humans who'd just saved her life. The hegemony's psychological warfare specialists had no protocols for this scenario. Our forces are reporting decreased combat efficiency across all engagement zones, Korthmel announced, reviewing the latest tactical reports with the enthusiasm of someone reading his own obituary. Crew members are requesting transfers to non-combat roles. Several ship commanders have filed formal complaints about the ethical implications of our current strategy. Vex'thara stared at the holographic display, showing the current battle lines. The humans were losing. Their technology was still inferior, their numbers still insufficient. But somehow, impossibly, the hegemony was losing too. Not ships or territory or strategic positions, but something far more fundamental. They were losing the ability to see their enemies as enemies. "Commander," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet. Admiral Nakamura is requesting permission to evacuate non-combatants from the damaged hegemony vessel Pristine Logic." Vex'thara's skin shifted through several colors before settling on a pale blue that indicated something her species had no word for: the emotional state of being utterly, completely lost. "Grant it," she said quietly. "Because what else could you do when your enemy kept insisting on saving your people?" The end came not with the thunder of weapons or the collapse of battle lines, but with a single image transmitted across every screen in the hegemony fleet. It showed Admiral Nakamura standing in the cargo bay of her flagship, personally helping to distribute blankets and medical supplies to 300 Draknari refugees whose transport had suffered catastrophic engine failure during what was supposed to be their evacuation from the war zone. Commander Vex'thara watched her crystalline reflection fracture in the command console as she leaned forward, studying the feed with the desperate intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that kept changing its own rules. The refugees weren't prisoners. They were families fleeing the conflict, including younglings whose large eyes held the universal expression of children caught in circumstances beyond their understanding. "Status report," she requested, though her voice carried none of its usual authority. "The humans have suspended all offensive operations," her tactical officer replied. "Their entire fleet is currently engaged in humanitarian assistance for our civilian populations. They're actually coordinating with our own rescue vessels." General Korthmel's image flickered to life on the communication array, his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides in a posture that would have been immediately recognizable to any human as defeat. "Vex'thara, I need to inform you that 17 of our ship commanders have formally requested permission to stand down. Not retreat, stand down. They're refusing to fire on enemies who keep saving our people." The irony was so perfect, it could have been scripted by a particularly vindictive deity. The hegemony of rational species, masters of logical warfare and mathematical precision, had been undone by the most irrational force in the galaxy: unconditional compassion. Our behavioral analysts are calling it weaponized empathy, Korthmel continued, and even through the holographic transmission, his exhaustion was palpable. "Though I'm not certain it qualifies as a weapon when the humans appear to be harming themselves as much as us. They've taken casualties protecting our civilians that they could have avoided by simply ignoring them." Vex'thara's communications array chimed with an incoming message. Admiral Nakamura's face appeared on screen, and for the first time since this conflict began, the human looked genuinely tired. Behind her, the organized chaos of a medical bay was visible, human and alien medical personnel working side by side to treat casualties from both fleets. "Commander Vex'thara," Nakamura began, "I'm transmitting coordinates for a neutral meeting point. I think it's time we discussed terms." "Terms of surrender?" Vex'thara asked, though the question felt hollow even as she spoke it. Nakamura's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement if the situation weren't so tragic. I was hoping you could tell me, because honestly, I have no idea what we're supposed to be fighting about anymore. The meeting took place aboard a damaged space station in neutral territory, with both commanders accompanied by minimal security details, who spent more time helping each other with technical difficulties than maintaining martial alertness. Vex'thara found herself sitting across from the human admiral in a conference room that smelled of recycled air and the peculiar metallic tang that came from hastily repaired life support systems. "So," Nakamura said, pouring herself coffee from a thermal container and offering a cup to Vex'thara. "Your people came here to conquer us because we're too emotional to govern ourselves properly. Is that about right?" The Mathematical Warfare Doctrine indicated that species driven by irrational impulses pose a threat to galactic stability, Vex'thara replied, accepting the coffee despite having no idea what to do with it. "And now?" Vex'thara stared into the dark liquid, watching her reflection waver in its surface. "Now I understand why you call it mercy, and why it's the most terrifying thing in the galaxy." The formal surrender documents were signed 6 hours later, though historians would spend decades arguing about who had actually surrendered to whom. The Hegemony withdrew their fleets, but only after Admiral Nakamura insisted on providing humanitarian aid to help resettle displaced alien populations. Earth joined the galactic community as an independent world, though they immediately began sharing their medical and rescue technologies with former enemies. As for Commander Vex'thara, she returned to Hegemony space with a new understanding of warfare and a thermos of human coffee that she'd somehow forgotten to return. The Mathematical Warfare Doctrine was quietly retired, replaced by something the bureaucrats called ethical engagement protocols, but which everyone understood meant try not to fight people who will save your life while you're shooting at them. Because it turned out that the most logical response to irrational kindness was surrender, not of territory or resources, but of the comfortable certainty that the universe made sense. And really, when you thought about it mathematically, that was probably the point all along.